Pinned against the freezing metal of the loading dock, Lisa watched the man she once called her mentor step out of the shadows, flanked by the very federal agent she had begged for help. Her shoulder was slick with blood from the server room struggle, and her fingers cramped around a single, battered flash drive. The only proof that the medicine being loaded onto the trucks behind her was actually a death sentence. "Give it up, Lisa," Mark whispered over the roar of the engines. "The town already thinks you're a monster, and the law says you're a thief." There's no one left to listen. As the massive warehouse doors groaned shut, sealing her inside with the men who had engineered the fraud, Lisa's phone vibrated in her pocket with a final, heartbreaking text from her daughter. "Mom, why are they throwing stones at our house?" She looked at the corrupt agent's badge, then at the crates of toxic hemostop ready to ship. She had 4 minutes before the trucks rolled out. No way out of the bay, and the terrifying realization that the people she was trying to save were the ones currently hunting her down. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly, clinical glow over the stainless steel counters of the Pharmatech Biologics plant. Lisa Carmichael stared at the monitor, her eyes burning from a 12-hour shift that seemed destined never to end. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, nails bitten to the quick as a crimson warning pulsed on the stability tester like a second heartbeat. Batch 47B, critical instability. The words glared from the screen, sharp and unblinking. This wasn't just a chemical deviation. The midnight batch of hemostop, a drug designed to save lives in trauma wards, was contaminated. If this reached a patient's bloodstream, it wouldn't stop a hemorrhage. It would trigger a systemic shutdown. The lab smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, a scent that usually signaled precision, but now felt like a premonition of blood. Lisa exhaled through her nose, the air catching in her dry throat. She was the head of quality control, the final barrier between corporate ambition and public safety. She looked at the red pulse of the alert, then at the clock. The federal deadline for the hemostop rollout was looming, a crushing weight that the plant director had used as a whip for weeks. Every second she stared at that light, she was defying the momentum of a multi-million-dollar machine. She shifted, and the paper in her pocket crinkled against her thigh. She didn't need to pull it out to know what it said. The mortgage company's logo had burned itself into her retinas weeks ago. Final notice. 3 months of arrears, a mountain of debt that threatened to swallow the modest suburban roof over her daughter's head. Emily's tuition was due, the car needed a new transmission, and Lisa's bank account was a wasteland of overdraft fees. The red light on the screen and the red ink on her bank statement seemed to be in a grim competition. If she flagged this batch, the audit would be brutal. Production would freeze. The bonuses that were supposed to save her home would vanish like mist. Lisa smoothed the fabric of her lab coat, her long fingers trembling slightly. She thought of Emily sleeping at home, unaware that their world was teetering on a precipice. The choice felt like a physical weight in her chest, a stone she couldn't swallow. But as she looked back at the toxicity readings, the raw data of the chemical failure, the scientist in her, the woman who had spent 20 years believing in the sanctity of the protocol, reared up. She couldn't do it. She couldn't sign her name to a death warrant for a stranger just to keep her own windows intact. "I'm not signing," she whispered to the empty lab, her voice a low growl of resolve. She reached for the digital authorization form, her mouse hovering over the reject button. It was an act of professional suicide, a deliberate strike against the company's production schedule. But as she clicked the button, the silence of the lab felt a little less oppressive. She was prioritizing safety over the schedule, integrity over the mortgage. The system demanded a signature, but Lisa Carmichael only gave it the truth. The machine didn't care about her ethics. The system immediately flagged the rejection, sending a ripple of alerts through the plant's internal network. Lisa knew she didn't have much time before the higher-ups noticed the break in the chain. She began a frantic recalibration of the laboratory sensors, her hands moving with a desperate, practiced speed. She needed to be sure. She needed the data to be so airtight that no one could argue a glitch or a sensor error. She ran the secondary tests, her eyes tracking the molecular breakdown of the hemostop compound as the centrifuge whirred in the background. The results were identical. The chemical failure was absolute. Lisa began gathering the digital evidence, dragging files into a secure folder, documenting the toxicity levels before the automated system could reach its scheduled overwrite at 4:00 a.m. She was building a fortress of facts, her pen scratching notes on a physical logbook as a backup. Her jaw was tight, her brows knitted together in an expression of severe focus. She was no longer just a QC manager. She was a witness. The heavy door to the lab hissed open. Lisa didn't turn around immediately, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized the footfalls, deliberate, confident, familiar. "Lisa, you're still here. I saw the alert on my way out." She finally turned, a profound sense of relief washing over her. Mark Thorne stood in the doorway, his lab coat unbuttoned, his tie loose in that way that always made him seem like the most approachable man in the building. Mark was more than her boss. He was the mentor who had guided her since her intern days, the friend who had checked in on her after the divorce. If anyone would understand the gravity of the situation, it was him. "Mark, thank God," she said, her voice cracking slightly. She gestured to the screen, the crimson light still pulsing. "Batch 47B? It's a mess. The stability is non-existent. I've run the diagnostics twice, recalibrated the sensors. It's not a mistake. We have to halt the line." She expected him to step forward, to look at the data with that analytical squint she'd admired for a decade. She expected him to pull out his phone and call the production floor to stop the pumps. She expected him to be the man she believed he was. Mark didn't move toward the screen. He stayed by the door, his pale blue eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't shock. It wasn't concern. It was something closer to disappointment, the way a father looks at a child who has failed a simple task. He sipped from a coffee cup, the ceramic clinking against his teeth in the quiet lab. "Lisa," he said, his voice rich and modulated, the tone he used in boardrooms to soothe nervous investors. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. The federal rollout is tomorrow morning. You know how much is riding on this. The company, the town, your own position. I know what's riding on it, Mark. That's why I'm telling you. If this ships, people die. It's lethal. Look at the pH imbalance, the molecular shearing. It's a chemical grenade." She stepped toward him, her hand outstretched as if to pull him toward the truth. "We need to report this. We need to go to the board." Mark set his coffee cup down on a stainless steel cart with a quiet, final thunk. His demeanor shifted. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, watery hardness. He didn't look like a mentor anymore. He looked like a man who had already made a calculation and found her to be a variable that needed to be solved. "The board already knows, Lisa," he said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. She froze, her hand dropping to her side. "What?" "Hand over the digital logs," Mark commanded, his voice dropping an octave. He stepped into her personal space, his shadow stretching across the sterile floor. "I'm not going to ask you again. Delete the sensor readings and authorize the batch." We'll tweak the next run, but this one has to ship." "You're joking," she whispered, her fingers twitching toward her left wrist, rubbing the old scar there. "Mark, you're the one who taught me that the data is sacred. You're the one who said we don't operate on hope. I'm the one who keeps this plant running so you can have a paycheck to pay that mortgage you're behind on." He snapped, his composure fraying. He lunged for the digital tablet she was holding, his manicured fingers clawing at the plastic casing. Lisa pulled back, her instincts taking over. "No." The struggle was sudden and violent. Mark wasn't a young man, but he was driven by a desperate, panicked energy. He shoved her against a chemical rack, the metal groaning under the impact. Glass vials shattered, raining down like diamonds across the floor, the smell of various reagents filling the air in a pungent, dangerous cloud. Lisa felt a sharp pain in her shoulder as she hit the frame, but she didn't let go of the tablet. "Give it to me," Mark hissed, his face inches from hers. She could smell the expensive cologne and the stale coffee on his breath. Lisa found a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. She planted her foot and kicked out, her heavy work shoe catching Mark in the shin. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away. She didn't stop to look back. She sprinted toward the server room at the back of the lab, her heart roaring in her ears. She dived through the door and slammed it shut, throwing the heavy manual bolt just as Mark's weight slammed into the other side. The metal thudded, the sound echoing in the small, climate-controlled bunker. "Lisa, open this door. Don't make this worse than it already is." Mark screamed from the other side, his voice muffled but dripping with rage. Lisa ignored him. She was shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She moved to the central server rack, her fingers flying across the console. She didn't have much time. He would have the security codes or a master key soon. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a hidden flash drive, a small, unassuming piece of plastic that was now the most dangerous object in the building. She plugged it in, her eyes fixed on the progress bar. Copying, 12%, 24%. The raw, unscrubbed chemical data, the logs of their fraud, the evidence of the lethal batch. It was all flowing onto the drive. Mark continued to pound on the door, the sound rhythmic and terrifying. "It's over, Lisa," he shouted. "The board didn't just miss the error. We engineered it. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain those stability standards? We saved $12 million on this batch alone. You think you're a hero? You're just a nuisance." Lisa felt a cold shiver run down her spine. He was confessing. He was so sure of his victory that he was laying it all out. She reached for her phone, hitting the voice memo app, holding it toward the door. $12 million, she whispered to herself. $12 million for 1,000 lives. The progress bar hit 100%. She snatched the drive from the port and tucked it into the secret lining of her bra, the plastic cold against her skin. She was trapped in a room with no windows and one door, and the man she had trusted most was on the other side, ready to destroy her, to protect a line on a spreadsheet. The thudding on the door stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was only the low whir of the server fans and the sound of Lisa's own frantic breathing. Then, a new sound, the heavy, metallic clack of the plant's electronic locks engaging. "Attention all personnel," a voice boomed over the intercom, cold and detached. It was the plant director, Daniel Reeves. "We are now in total facility lockdown. Code red, all exits are sealed. Security teams, report to Sector 4. Lisa watched through the small, reinforced glass slit in the server room door as the heavy steel shutters descended over the lab windows, blocking out the faint pre-dawn light. She wasn't just trapped in a room anymore. She was a prisoner in a fortress. The air in the server room suddenly felt heavy. Lisa looked up at the ventilation grate. The low hum of the HVAC system had died. In its place was a silence so absolute, it felt like a physical pressure. They had cut the air. The temperature began to rise almost immediately. The server racks, packed with high-performance hardware, generated an immense amount of heat, usually offset by a constant stream of chilled air. Without it, the room was becoming an oven. Lisa felt sweat prickling her hairline, her lab coat suddenly feeling like a lead weight. She gasped for air, but the oxygen was thinning, replaced by the dry electric smell of overheating silicon. "You can't stay in there forever, Lisa." Mark's voice came through the door, calmer now, almost conversational. "The hardware will fail in 20 minutes. The data will fry, and you'll go with it. Just give me the drive, and I'll tell Reeves to turn the air back on. We can still fix this." Lisa didn't answer. She was looking around the room, her mind racing through the schematics of the building she had worked in for 15 years. She knew the server room wasn't just a dead end, it was a hub. She grabbed a heavy rack-mounting tool from a workbench, a solid piece of steel, and dragged a chair over to the corner of the room. She climbed up, the heat making her lightheaded. She began to hammer at the screws of a high-level maintenance hatch, the metal-on-metal clanging echoing in the small space. Her breath came in shallow hitches. She couldn't pass out. Not now. With a final, desperate heave, she sheared the last screw, and the hatch fell, clattering onto the server racks below. A dark, narrow void yawned above her. It wasn't fresh air, but it was a path. She hauled herself up, her muscles screaming, her fingers catching on the sharp edges of the metallic duct. She dragged her body into the cramped ventilation shaft, the smell of old dust and cold metal filling her lungs. She was crawling through the veins of the machine. The duct was barely wide enough for her shoulders, the galvanized steel groaning under her weight. Below her, she could hear the muffled sounds of the plant, the distant beep of a forklift, the rhythmic clank of the conveyor belts that were still moving, still preparing to ship the poison. "Lisa Carmichael, this is Director Reeves." The intercom voice echoed through the vents, distorted and ghostly. "You are currently in possession of proprietary company property. Your actions constitute industrial espionage and domestic terrorism. If you do not surrender to security immediately, we will be forced to involve the authorities. Think of your daughter, Lisa. Think of what happens to her when her mother is in a federal penitentiary." Lisa gritted her teeth, her knees scraping against the rivets of the duct. The psychological pressure was a different kind of heat, one that burned from the inside out. They were already building the narrative. They were turning her into the villain before she even reached the exit. She reached a junction and peered through a grate. Below her was the vast expanse of the warehouse. Towering metal shelves stretched into the gloom, stacked high with pallets of pharmaceuticals. Flickering fluorescent lights cast long, skeletal shadows across the concrete floor. She saw a security team. 3 men in dark uniforms, carrying batons and radios, moving slowly down the main aisle. She waited until they passed, her heart thumping against the steel duct. She kicked the grate out, the sound muffled by the distant rumble of the HVAC system in this larger sector. She dropped from the ceiling, landing hard on a stack of chemical crates. The impact jolted her spine, but she rolled off and ducked behind a pallet of bulk saline. She stayed still, clutching the flash drive through her clothes. She needed to get to the shipping bay, but the warehouse was a labyrinth, and they knew she was here. A shadow fell across the aisle to her left. Lisa froze. A security guard, younger than the others, was standing 10 feet away, his radio crackling with static. He hadn't seen her yet, but he was turning. Lisa's eyes darted to the wall. A red cylinder hung there, a CO2 fire extinguisher. She didn't think. She moved. As the guard turned, his eyes widening, Lisa snatched the extinguisher from its bracket and squeezed the trigger. A blinding white cloud of frozen carbon dioxide erupted, filling the aisle with a deafening hiss. The guard shouted, stumbling back as the frigid vapor obscured everything. Lisa didn't wait to see if he was down. She swung the heavy base of the extinguisher, catching him in the meat of his thigh. He let out a choked cry and crumpled to his knees. Lisa grabbed his radio from his belt as she sprinted past, disappearing into the maze of shelves before the white cloud could dissipate. She ducked into a narrow gap between two pallets of heart medication, her chest heaving. She keyed the radio, keeping the volume low. Sector 3 is clear. Moving to the loading zone. Thorne says she's headed for the perimeter. Close the north gates. Don't let her near the fence. Mark's voice came through the static, sharp and commanding. She's smart, but she's desperate. She knows the trucks leave at 6 o'clock. She'll try to sabotage the fleet, secure the bays. Lisa felt a surge of cold clarity. They had the perimeter. They had the gates. But they didn't know she had the radio. She looked at the shipping office at the end of the warehouse, a small glass-walled cube that housed the logistics terminals. She moved with the shadows, a ghost in her own workplace. She reached the office and slipped inside. A television was mounted on the wall, tuned to a local news station. She froze as a photo of her own face appeared on the screen. A professional headshot from the company directory, looking stern and capable. Police are searching for Lisa Carmichael, a disgruntled employee at Pharmatech Biologics, who is suspected of attempting to contaminate a major shipment of life-saving medication, the news anchor said, her voice smooth and practiced. Authorities warn that Carmichael may be unstable. Residents are advised to stay indoors. The betrayal was total. They hadn't just sealed the doors. They had poisoned the well. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking. It was Emily. Mom? Her daughter's voice was a ragged sob. Mom, there are people outside. They're throwing rocks at the windows. They're saying you're a murderer. The neighbors. Mr. Henderson called you a traitor. Mom, what's happening? I'm scared. Lisa felt a surge of protective rage so intense it made her vision blur. Emily, listen to me. Get into the basement. Lock the door. Don't answer for anyone but me. I'm coming home, baby. I promise. I'm doing this for them, Emily. I'm doing this for everyone. They hate us, Mom, Emily cried. They hate us. Lisa ended the call, her hand shaking. The town's economy was built on pharmatech. The people throwing stones were the same ones whose mortgages were paid by the very poison she was trying to stop. The corporate propaganda had turned her neighbors into a lynch mob. She looked at the flash drive. Despair, cold and heavy, threatened to pull her under. Was it worth it? If the people she was saving were the ones breaking her windows, why was she fighting? But then she thought of the patients in those trauma wards. She thought of people who would never know her name, who would die in agony because a board of directors wanted a better quarterly report. She couldn't let them win. She looked at the clock. 5:30 4:15 a.m. The shipment ceremony was in 45 minutes. The trucks were idling in the bay, their exhaust plumes rising into the gray morning air. I'm not a traitor, she whispered, her voice dropping into that dangerous, quiet calm. I'm the only one in this building who isn't. She began to type on the logistics terminal, her fingers flying. She didn't need an escape route. She needed a stage. The shipping bay was a cavernous space of concrete and steel, echoing with the low, rhythmic rumble of heavy diesel engines. 3 massive tractor trailers sat at the loading docks. their rear doors sealed with lead tags, their bellies full of the toxic hemostop. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and the cold, damp scent of the approaching dawn. Lisa moved through the shadows of the maintenance corridor, her lab coat discarded, her dark hair matted with sweat and dust. She was a different woman than the one who had started this shift. The severe, rule-following QC manager had been replaced by something leaner, harder. She reached a dimly lit diagnostic terminal tucked behind a row of industrial boilers. This was her last chance. The internal network was a cage, but the maintenance lines often had separate diagnostic uplinks for external contractors. She plugged her phone into the port, her hands steady now. She initiated a ping, a high-priority alert to a federal regulatory contact she'd worked with during the last audit. Contamination event. Batch 47B. Fraud documented. Need immediate intervention at Pharmatech Plant 4. The screen flickered. Sending. You always were a believer in the cavalry, Lisa. The voice came from the darkness behind her. Lisa spun around, her back hitting the warm metal of a steam pipe. Mark Thorne stepped into the dim light of the terminal, a heavy wrench in his hand. His tailored suit was ruined, his face smeared with grease, but his eyes were bright with a manic, desperate energy. They're not coming, Mark said, his voice a low rumble. Reeves has the regional office in his pocket. Your contact is probably sitting on a beach in Cabo right now, paid for by the $12 million we saved. You're lying, Lisa said, though her heart faltered. The system works, Mark. It has to. The system works exactly how we designed it to work. He countered, stepping closer. It protects the producers. It protects the economy. You're just a glitch in the software, Lisa, and I'm here to delete you. He lunged. The physical brawl was raw and desperate. Mark swung the wrench, the heavy metal whistling past Lisa's ear and clanging against a pipe, sending a shower of sparks into the dark. Lisa dived forward, tackling him around the waist, her momentum carrying them both into a maze of hissing steam valves. They crashed into the concrete floor, rolling through the grime. Mark was stronger, but Lisa was fueled by a cold, righteous fury. She clawed at his face, her nails drawing blood as he tried to pin her down. He grabbed her throat, his manicured fingers squeezing with a terrifying strength. Give me the drive, he hissed, his face turning purple with effort. Lisa felt the world beginning to gray at the edges. The heat from the surrounding pipes was oppressive, the sound of hissing steam a roar in her ears. She reached out blindly, her fingers brushing against a manual override lever, a bright red handle designed for emergency pressure release. She gripped it and pulled. A deafening blast of high-pressure steam erupted from the safety valve directly behind Mark. The scalding white vapor enveloped him in an instant. He let out a shriek of agony and released his grip, stumbling back into the blinding cloud. Lisa scrambled away, her lungs burning, her throat raw. She didn't look back to see how badly he was burned. She ran. She burst into the shipping bay, her eyes squinting against the harsh floodlights. A black government sedan was pulling up to the main loading dock, its tires screeching on the concrete. Hope, fragile and sharp, flared in her chest. The door opened, and a man in a crisp gray suit stepped out. He held a federal ID badge aloft. Lisa Carmichael? I'm Special Agent Holloway. I received your ping. Where is the evidence? Lisa slowed down, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached into her clothes, her fingers touching the cold plastic of the flash drive. She looked up at the observation balcony. Director Reeves was standing there, his arms crossed, watching with an expression of bored detachment. He didn't look worried. He didn't look like a man whose empire was about to crumble. He looked at Holloway. Holloway looked back. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. Lisa froze. She looked at Holloway's badge. The printing was crisp, the eagle proud, but something was wrong. Her mind, trained for decades to spot the smallest deviation, the tiniest chemical imbalance, caught it. The seal was mirrored. A counterfeit. "You're not FBI," she whispered, her voice trembling. Holloway's expression didn't change, but his hand moved toward his jacket, reaching for a holster. "The drive, Lisa. Now, don't make this a crime scene." The facility guards began to close in from the shadows, their batons drawn. Mark Thorne emerged from the maintenance tunnel, his face blistered, his eyes full of a murderous light. Lisa backed away, her heels clicking on the concrete. The truck engines roared, a symphony of destruction. The heavy bay doors began to rise, revealing the pale, sickly light of a gray morning. "You have nowhere to go, Lisa." Reeves's voice boomed from the balcony. "The trucks are leaving, the town is waiting, and you are alone." Lisa looked at the trucks, then at the corrupt agent, then at the man who had been her mentor. She was trapped in the heart of the machine, surrounded by the very people who had built it. But she wasn't just a scientist. She was a mother whose house was being stoned. She was a woman who had nothing left to lose. She looked at the emergency chemical mixing station 10 feet to her left. A massive tank of high-expansion firefighting foam designed to smother a chemical fire in seconds. "I'm not alone," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm. "I'm the only one here who knows how this plant actually works." She lunged for the control panel. Holloway shouted, "Stop her!" But he was too late. Lisa's fingers danced across the override codes, the ones she'd memorized during the safety audits Mark had always complained about. She bypassed the fire sensors, bypassed the delay timers, and hit the manual discharge. The world vanished. A massive roaring wall of white foam erupted from the ceiling-mounted nozzles, a chemical blizzard that filled the shipping bay in seconds. It wasn't just foam. It was a suffocating, blinding curtain of high-expansion bubbles that expanded at a terrifying rate. Holloway disappeared. The guards disappeared. The trucks became ghostly shapes in a white void. Lisa dived into the foam, the cold, soapy substance stinging her eyes and filling her nose. She knew the layout. She knew where the forklift was parked, where the support pillars stood. She moved by touch, a ghost in a whiteout. She felt a hand grab her shoulder. Mark screaming her name, but she twisted away, using the slickness of the foam to slide through his grip. She didn't head for the gate. She headed for the public entrance. She burst through the main lobby doors, a creature of foam and grime, stumbling out onto the asphalt of the ceremony site. The scene was surreal. A stage had been set up, draped in blue pharma banners. News vans with satellite dishes sat idling. A crowd of townspeople, some holding signs of support, others looking confused, stood behind a rope line. The mayor was at the podium, his voice echoing over the speakers. "A new era of prosperity for our town, thanks to the vision of pharmatech." Lisa didn't stop. She ran onto the stage, her appearance so jarring that the mayor stopped mid-sentence, his jaw dropping. "Stop the trucks!" Lisa screamed, her voice amplified by the microphones she lunged for. "The hemostop is toxic. It's a fraud." The cameras turned. The flashes began to pop like tiny explosions. Director Reeves burst through the lobby doors, shouting for security. But the press was already there, their lenses fixed on the woman who looked like she had crawled out of a war zone. "I have the data." Lisa held the flash drive high, her hand steady. "And it's already gone. I didn't send it to the feds. I sent it to the patient advocacy group through my daughter's school portal 3 hours ago. It's on the internet. It's everywhere. The silence that followed was broken only by the sudden, distant wail of sirens. Real sirens. Not the lone sedan of a corrupt agent, but a swarm. State police, federal investigators, the real authorities. Mark Thorne stumbled out of the building, his face a mask of blisters and foam, looking at the cameras with the hollow eyes of a man who realized his legacy was being cremated in real time. Lisa watched as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists. She watched as Reeves was led away, his face pale and sweating. She watched as the trucks were impounded, their lethal cargo sealed. She lost her job that day. She lost her house a month later. The town didn't apologize. The people whose jobs vanished along with the plant still looked away when they saw her in the grocery store. But 6 months later, Lisa Carmichael stood in a sun-drenched classroom at a small community college. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a single word on the board. Integrity. She looked at the front row. Emily sat there, her hair dyed a bright, defiant pink, her green eyes bright with a pride that no stone could ever break. Lisa walked out of the building after class and sat on a park bench. The air smelled of cut grass and car exhaust, the simple, honest sense of a world that was still turning. She watched Emily run across the grass, laughing as she chased a stray dog. Lisa reached into her pocket and felt the small, worn-out photo of her father. She had no mortgage. She had no career in big pharma. She had a bank account that was barely above zero. But as she watched her daughter play, Lisa Carmichael inhaled the sweet, clean air and realized for the first time in 47 years what it felt like to be truly, utterly safe. She had saved thousands of lives, and in the process, she had finally saved her own.